Hi, I'm Douglas Merrill. I want to talk today about innovation at Google. Thank you very much for coming. I'm really excited to get the chance to talk about this. We are an engine for innovation. Yes, technically we're a search, advertising, and applications company, what we call search, ads, and apps. But the reason we've been successful at search, ads, and apps is because we've managed to innovate and find new and unusual ways to solve really, really hard problems. And that's what I want to talk about today. Google was founded in the late 90s by two graduate students with this amazing idea to take all the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. All the world's information, universally accessible and useful. The three parts of our mission that operate us today. All the world's information, not just the web. All the world's information, not just the web in English, the web in any language. Books, print, radio, TV, all the world's information. Universally accessible. Although I'm projecting this deck today from a laptop, in lots of the world they don't have good wireline internet access, or laptops are very expensive. So to make the information universally accessible, you might need to go over a telephone, or you might need to go over some other kind of kiosk device. Universally accessible. All the world should get to reach out to this great new world. And useful. The hardest part of making information is not actually making it available, it's making it useful once you have it. You can present large tables of numbers that have all the information value, but if you don't put them on a map, those numbers are less useful, etc. We spend a lot of our time and a lot of our AI work and a lot of our innovation around figuring out ways to make more information useful. Let me talk for a couple of seconds about what search is. Google is a search company at heart. We know how to provide search experiences. And there are really four parts of search. And I want to talk about this not to make you Google experts, but rather because it helps provide context for some of what I'm going to say later. The first thing, when people talk about search, you see this in press reports of search a lot, they ask about how big is your index? How many documents do you have? And we kind of don't talk about that a lot because it's not really the right number. We talk about comprehensiveness. Comprehensiveness is more than just index size. Comprehensiveness is how much of this information of a kind do you cover. So web comprehensiveness says how many web pages do you have. You could probably count them, but the counting's kind of meaningless, and so that's why we don't really engage in it. Do you count the same page twice? How do you decide? The point is, if someone has a query that should be answered by a web page, do you have that web page in your index? That's comprehensiveness. The problem is, lots of queries shouldn't be answered by a web page. If you do a query, what is Winston Churchill's birthday? You ought to get a date back, not just a web page. If you do a query that says, where is Google headquarters, you should get a map back, not just a Google page. Right? Sometimes comprehensiveness means more than just web pages. And if you think about those examples I just gave you, relevance is also important. Relevance is the second component we talk about in sort of overall search. Relevance is a term of art, meaning that the results that appear close to the top are actually what you meant. So notice what I just said, what you meant. Our goal is to have the top result be not just what you asked for, but what you should have asked for, what you really meant. Let me give you an example. If you do a query, you do a search for the word A-P-P-L-E-S, the word apples, you're going to get a bunch of results back, including stuff on fruit and all kinds of different stuff. If you do a search for A-P-P-L-E, apple, you're going to get another set of results back, mostly about a computer manufacturer. Because our automated and objective algorithms have figured out that users, when they do a search for Apple, are more often looking for a computer manufacturer, now a phone manufacturer or a MP3 player manufacturer, than they are for fruit. When we talk about relevance, we mean the innovations that we've done, innovations, note, foreshadowing, a cheap technique used by authors. The innovations that we've done to make the results more likely to be what you wanted, not just what you said. Another interesting thing, speed matters. I'll talk about this a lot more later. Latency matters a lot. In fact, in a minute I'm going to give you an actual statistic that shows that we can lose 15% of our traffic just by slowing down 200 milliseconds. Turns out speed matters a lot. Speed matters as much as anything else. If you have a comprehensive, good, highly relevant answer and it takes too long to respond, your users will opt out. So we've done a whole bunch of technical work to make it possible for us to answer any question anywhere in the world in about 400 milliseconds. 400 milliseconds, not a long time, unlike how long I'm talking on this slide. So I should pick up the pace. The most important part of search is the user experience. Do your users get what they want, how they understand it. So recently we announced One Google, or what we call universal search. This idea that you can do a search for Darth Vader and get not just web pages about Darth Vader and maybe some images about Darth Vader, but also maybe some video clips and maybe some blog content and some news even, although there hasn't been news about Darth Vader lately that I'm aware of. Maybe there has. Is there a new Star Wars coming out? Anyway, that's not relevant right now. That was a pun to my previous slide. Yeah, you guys are a tough crowd. Okay. The point of the most important part of the user experience is to make it possible so that users understand intuitively what they're getting. That's what makes a good search engine. Search is a very hard problem. It's not enough to have a very big index. An index of what? You cover the right kinds of documents. It's not enough to have a big index if you don't reply with the right kinds of relevant, important, meaningful results. It's not enough to have a big index and reply with the right kind of meaningful, important results if you do it slowly. And finally, it's not enough to do all those things if you do it in a way that the user can't understand and you don't help the user have the experience, of what they're trying to find. Those are the components of search, and search is still not solved. We've been working on it for a long time. We have centuries of innovation into this to get where we are today. And yet, there are a lot of problems that we're still working on that are really, really hard. Google Book Search, for example, a really interesting project we have going on that's partially with publishers and partially with libraries to try and understand the content that's in books. We're scanning the content and making it so you can search. And then if you can search for content which is in books, there's lots of great content in books. I like books. Most people have read books. Have you guys read a book? Wow, they're both saying no, that's scary. Anyway, the point of book search is to say there's information which isn't on the web. Remember our mission, all the world's information, universally accessible and useful. It's useful to be able to ask Google, who is Ishmael? And get an answer back that says you should go buy Moby Dick from Amazon or from your local bookseller. Access on mobile, I talked a little bit about that, I'll talk more about it later. It turns out that there are millions of cell phones in Africa with non-wireline internet access and a handful of wired internet access points. If you want all the world's information to be universally accessible, you need to figure out the mobile access problem. But if you think about it, on a phone, you probably shouldn't interact the same way you interact on a keyboard. Right? Tri-touch is hard, and the screens are very small, so pages have to be re-rendered. It's very complicated. There ought to be something like maybe you call a phone number and you speak into it, and you get search results back. Or maybe they text you the search results back so you can choose between them. There ought to be some way of recognizing as you move from one medium to another. So what that means is you went to Maps, you found your start address, you found your end address, you did a search, you printed it out, and then you walked off without it. Why is it that map just doesn't automatically follow you to your phone? Right? It ought to be about you. Problems like that. Search is a fascinating thing across access mechanisms. To talk briefly about machine translation, one of the very hardest AI problems ever is machine translation, translating automatically from one language to another language. Google has recently won a series of awards from the Association of Computing Machine for automated machine translation from English to Arabic and back, and English to Chinese and back. What that means is we have machines that analyze an English stream or a Chinese stream and translate it into the other. I'm a very big soccer fan. It turns out the rest of the world calls that game football. Americans call something else football. When I do a search for soccer, it ought to be the case that Google can return web pages or news results or video results in Italian about football using whatever the Italian word for football is. Right? Machine translation is another way to let people have access to all the world's information. One of the greatest side effects of the internet revolution has been the democratization of information, the ability for people to tell their story regardless of who they are. In the past, history was always written by the winners. Pop quiz. What's the difference between a revolution and a civil war? Answer? Who won? If the folks having the revolution won, it's a revolution. If the government won, it's a civil war. The only difference is who won. History is written by the winners. That's not the right answer. History ought to get written by everybody. And one of the great things about the internet and companies like Google and others is that we've given tools for everyone to tell their story. But it's not enough to be able to tell your story. You have to be able to find that story. Search is the oxygen of the information economy, because without search you can't find information. If you can find information, you can find multiple perspectives. If you can find multiple perspectives, you get to different, more innovative answers. Google is an innovation engine, and we are applying those innovations to these problems and others. Somehow, you all have been nice enough to let me use the word innovation probably 1,000 times already without defining it. There are really three kinds of innovation. Innovation is an interesting topic in the world. Fundamentally, about every 5 or 6 years, there's a wave. That wave is something like this. Somebody publishes a Forbes paper or a Harvard Business Review article or something that says, wow, companies need to innovate more because if they innovate more, they'll get new products, they'll get new markets, and they will own the world. A new hegemony will arise. And so there's a bunch of articles about innovation and often references to hegemonic kinds of companies. I just struggled a lot over that word. I'll keep trying it. I'll throw it a few more times into the talk. You guys can all laugh when I screw it up. The problem is that goes on for a while. There's lots of focus, and then suddenly somebody writes the counterpoint article. The counterpoint article goes something like, oh yeah, innovation is not useful. Innovation is just wastes money. Fundamentally, companies should focus on their core business, because clearly innovation is antithetical to your core. And then you're on the downward cycle, and all of a sudden everyone's like, oh, we shouldn't innovate, we should execute better, and there's this sort of move back to scientific management, and then 2 or 3 years later we start it all over again. So we're sort of over here, it seems to me, on this wave, right? We have had the recent articles in the popular business press talking about innovation for its own sake, etc. The problem with the whole conversation is they also don't define what innovation means. Truth is, I agree. Innovation for its own sake isn't useful. So then what is useful? Let's step back. What is innovation? There are really, if you think about it, 3 kinds of innovation. There's incremental innovation. A little thing changes that changes something little small. There's a great biological example of this, right? Evolution. Sorry for the creationists in the audience. Sorry. Anyway, evolution exists. It's okay. Evolution has a whole works on us all this big thing of DNA and makes a little change, and most of the changes are irrelevant, and some of the changes are really bad, and some of the changes are good, but each one's a little tiny. Incremental innovation. It's also in business was that everything we talked about in the 70s and early 80s around lean manufacturing for cars. The idea that we should move the tools slightly closer to the workers because that saves them extra movement, and that saves a few minutes per car, and quality is free, and incremental innovations, small changes to process. Good to do, but not the only kind of innovation. There's also a second order kind of innovation, what I call incremental innovation that has a side effect. A biological example of a side effect: the opposable thumb. If you think about it, animals sort of farther down the evolutionary ladder than us don't have opposable thumbs. They have sort of, an extra finger up there. And over time, that finger moves over and over and over, and all of a sudden, it gets far enough over to where its axis of rotation is against the axis of rotation of the other fingers, and you have an opposable thumb. What happens the minute you have an opposable thumb? You have tools. You have pencils. Suddenly, the world changes. It wasn't that big a change, right? It's just a few degrees of axis of rotation of a joint, but that side effect creates civilization. Incremental innovation with side effects. Very, very important. And then there's the thing that we all think of as innovation: transformational change. Transformational change. Suddenly, something has changed, and the world changes. Everything is different. Biological examples of transformational change are hard. Maybe it's the asteroid hitting in northern Siberia causing the extinction of lots of species, maybe. Or maybe it's the evolutionary change of your gills falling off. Because the minute you don't have gills anymore, you better be able to move on dry land, or you're done. Right? Without gills in the water, you're drowning, yeah? Gills, fish. Fish, come on, yeah, you're awake, right? Okay. Transformational things don't happen a lot in biology because they're not very efficient. They're not very effective. They happen a fair amount in business. I would argue that a transformational change in business is Google's auction model for ads, where the price for an ad is based on someone clicking on the ad, and the value of that ad is the economic value created by that ad clicking, which is actually the price bid by the one under you. So I would argue that the concept of targeted internet advertising is a transformational change to business. But still, there aren't a lot of examples of it, and it's what we all spend all of our time talking about. Let me give you a few examples in Google's context of all three kinds of these innovations, if I may. I'm a Google person talking about Google. Thank you for bearing with me. If you do a web search for the words heart attack, I don't really actually know what you're looking for. If you were to grab a medical textbook, just an average medical textbook, and open up to heart attack, you're going to find, in the index, you're going to find a whole page of entries of different kinds of things, and each one refers to one or two pages. So you're at an index entry for heart attack, and this index has 100 sub-entries. I don't know what you're trying to do. So originally, we noticed the same thing on the web. People would do a search for heart attack, and they'd go to a page, they'd come back up, and they'd do a search for, maybe heart attack symptom or heart attack treatment. In fact, we have a story of a person who did a search for heart attack and kind of looked at some page and then did a search for heart attack symptoms, and then called 911 because he discovered that his symptoms matched that he was having a heart attack. He went to the hospital and lived. He was, in fact, having a heart attack. It's a tremendously heartwarming story. On the other hand, why do we make him do 2 searches to find that? We could have saved him, 30 seconds or whatever. So now if you do a search for heart attack, what you'll see is a little box, and we kind of called it out at the bottom, what we call search refinement. These are other things that people who search for heart attack have looked for. We didn't have some human go through the logs and figure it out. We did an automated and objective analysis using algorithms to study kind of what happens in searches. And we found that people who are looking for heart attack are often looking for information for health professionals or causes and risk factors. That's an incremental innovation which adds a lot of value to our users. Incremental innovations are very useful. We would have saved that guy an entire search. However, we also have examples of incremental innovations that include side effects. So here's a side effect. Google has a business whereby we will syndicate ads, run our ads on other people's content. It's called an AdSense. In this case, you can see in the sort of bottom right-hand side of the screen, we have some ads we're showing, and there's also a banner ad on the top. This particular page is about space exploration. So presumably someone did a search for space and got led here, etc. And it's sort of an interesting article and talks a little about geology. It's a kind of a good science article. Our ads are prints of the space shuttle. Okay, reasonable. If you're interested in space, you might be interested in kind of a wall hanging and other kinds of things like that. And also, we have a sort of a newsy update about the Mars rover. The random ad is an Army ad. The connection between space travel and the Army escapes me slightly. The side effect here is that not a lot of people would click on the Army ad. That Army ad didn't add a lot of economic value to the creator of this page. However, lots of people click on our ads. When someone clicks on a syndicated ad, if someone has a content page and they show one of our ads, and a person visits that page and clicks on an ad, we get some of the revenue, and the content creator gets some of the revenue, the person who wrote that page. What's the side effect? The side effect is we made it possible for people to make their entire living or part of their living writing content online, sharing their stories. I talked about the democratization of information. Everyone gets to tell their story. Only rich people get to tell their stories full time. Rich people or people who are getting paid. We provided a way for people to get paid to tell their stories in an effective way. A side effect of this innovation was the creation of a more democratized information field. Really great side effect. So is the opposable thumb. We also have transformational innovations that have happened at Google. Google started as a random assortment of hardware. You can see it in the upper left-hand corner there. That was when we were still at Stanford, google.stanford.edu. But when we became Google.com, we realized that a really important part of what we did would be managing hardware cost and building pieces of software that could survive hardware failure. So we built our own hardware. You can't really see it in this picture, but those hard drives in the middle there are just regular hard drives like you'd buy from Fry's or CompUSA. They're probably not as good as what's in your kid's game machine. They break a lot. So we had to build software to allow machines to break and to allow the software to handle the failures in a really clever way. We made a transformational innovation to run on extraordinarily cheap hardware and build software and computer science to handle that. That changed the terms of the game. We recently published a paper that showed that our cost per MIP, as opposed to reliable hardware, we get about a 10,000-fold cost per price increase. That's a totally game-changing kind of number. However, that wasn't enough. We took that transformational innovation and we got better at it. If you look at the upper left-hand corner of this, that's a data center that we built in about 2000. We still have a lot of the same kind of weird computer stuff, right? They're all still these single hardware blades. We still have cheap hard drives in there, etc. But we look a lot more professional. The racks make more sense. It's got good cable management. I'm kind of an ops guy as well. I like good cable management. The color of the cables are all right. Proud of that data center. With one minor problem. It turns out that if you put a bunch of computers in one spot, they get hot. So we had to add a fan. We're not quite perfect yet. We're getting there. And if you look by 2001, we're building data centers, look, no fans. We've gradually gotten better. That's the story. A transformational innovation merely starts the clock on when and how you do incremental innovations on top. That article that said innovation for its own sake is useless, that article was right. Because a transformational innovation is only as good as the business value it creates, and only as useful as the incremental innovations that happen after it to make it better and make the economic value sustain. At this point in the talk, I normally have either half my audience asleep, which appears to be about right, or I have people saying, yeah, that's great. So what? Tell me how to do this. I don't understand. I like the idea of innovation. We'd love to have a bunch more. Go buy me some of that. Innovation for its own sake is useless. Yes, you're right. Innovation based on what users need is likely to create economic value. So whatever you do, start innovating with the user. And obviously, the first thing you should do is ask users what they want. Right, Mr. Ford? Yeah, right, won't work. If I'd asked customers what they wanted, they'd ask for a faster horse. For those of you who don't know, Henry Ford built cars. Been dead a while. Anyway, he didn't build faster horses. He's right. Users don't know what they want. Ever. But they might know what problems they have. So, Googlers talk a lot. You may have noticed that from this presentation. Sorry. We send lots of emails too. Lots of them. I get several hundred emails a day that aren't spam. So that problem's been around for a long time. And we had an engineer who was getting annoyed with it. He was tired of the volume of email. Thought there. Let's take a step back. Everyone knows that email is a solved problem, right? We released Gmail on April 1st a couple of years ago, an idea which sounded brilliant and funny at the time and turned out to be most unfortunate. It was not an April Fool's joke. We really meant it. We just thought it was funny to release it on April 1st. When we released Gmail, everyone knew email was a solved problem. All you want is folders and kind of a rich interface and lots of colors and this idea that maybe you'll have a megabyte or two. Yeah, probably actually a couple hundred kilobytes of email at any one time. Email was a solved problem. Now, let's go back to this engineer who's getting annoyed about all the hundreds of emails he's getting a day. He comes up with a pretty simple idea, actually. Wouldn't it be helpful if we just sorted all the email by the thread that it's about? So if I get 50 emails about my funny-looking purple shirt, wouldn't it be nice to have all those 50 together so I can delete them all at once? Or 50 emails about how my hair is too long, or pick your poison. Put them all together. We call it conversation view. And second, wouldn't it be cool if it were possible to store all your email online and search it? Neither of those two ideas was in the email solution I described a minute ago, right? And yet, they're the single most popular and important parts of our Gmail product. Conversation view and essentially infinite email storage and mail. This is an example of the kind of innovation that happens when your users try to solve their own problem. I use Gmail as an example because it's a very sort of compelling example, but I could have used dozens of examples. Fundamentally, your users don't know what they want, so you can't ask them. If you ask them, they'll give you a dumb answer. But if you identify the problems they have, you can find interesting products. So that's the first way of listening to your user. Listen to your user by starting with their problems. So for example, when we launched Google News, everybody understood that the news on the web was going to be the province of the online repositories of these tremendously great content producers, and that the web was going to be another outlet for really creative content. And so the only way to do news interestingly on the web was to do content creation. We don't do content creation. We don't do editing. There's tremendously talented people who write articles and edit articles and make really, really important content get created. And what we do is allow people to find it more easily and aggregate them together. Google News is now one of the most popular news sites on the web with no content creators or editors. We started with a problem. I can't find a news story. And we created an incredibly important product. The same thing is true of desktop search or Google Local. Start with the users. Start with problems. Don't ask your users because they won't get it. But it turns out your users are talking to you every day. Your users are talking to you every day through what they actually do. Another way to listen to your users is listen to the data. Okay, this is the interactive part of the talk, boys and girls. Everybody wake up. Woo, yes, move around. Very nice. Move, wiggle your fingers. Wiggle, wiggle, wiggle fingers. Okay, good. What's on the screen? No, it's not cities. What's on the screen is clearly a map of the world. It is not a map of the world at night. It's obviously not a map of the world at night because the entire world is not at night at one time. So barring the sun burning out or something really creepy happening, it's not that. We put a white dot on the map every place we saw a query. Okay? So what that means is that, someplace in there, there's somebody doing a query. And obviously it makes sense. You can sort of see the cities because there are more people in cities, thus there are more queries, etc. And you can sort of see a temporal effect, right? Like, people, so bright, bright, bright. So clearly people wake up in Europe, and they wake up on the East Coast, and they wake up on the West Coast, etc. You can see kind of Japan over here. What can't you see? Where's Africa? I promise it's there. I flew over it a few days ago. The continent was there, really. Why are there no searches in Africa? So what we just learned from this, what we just learned from listening to our users, is that we don't have users in Africa. What causes our user problems in Africa? Fundamentally, what causes the user issues in Africa is very, very bad wireline internet. Governments have learned two things about the internet over the years. Thing number one, profoundly destabilizing to authoritarian governments. Problem number two, really great source of tax revenue. So fundamentally, wireline access in Africa is tightly controlled by the government and heavily taxed, thus not growing that fast. So, for example, if your company's mission is to make all the world's information universally accessible and useful, you're going to have to try a different tack, a different set of products, a different set of goals to deal with Africa. And so, for example, recently we announced a set of partnerships with universities in Kenya to provide sort of satellite-connected internet, and we're working with a series of mobile providers to try and provide mobile access. What we learned here is there's a huge set of need for products from users that couldn't talk to us because they can't reach us. Let's continue looking at what our users tell us. Our users tell us a lot every day. Ignore the scale and the times, don't worry about it. Fundamentally, what you have here are lines that show query usage. Okay? How many queries are coming into Google, more or less. On the left-hand side is a normal Sunday. And you notice that, people are asleep. They wake up, they do some queries, they kind of hang around, and they go play golf or whatever. Maybe this is the 60-minute spike or something when there's something on the news and you're trying to understand it. Anyway, big usage, low usage. On one particular Sunday, we see this pattern. What's different? This little spike. What do we think the spike is? Yes, the spike is a costume malfunction at the Super Bowl. That would be the Janet Jackson spike. Continuing on, wandering through our query logs. This one's kind of fun if you're a news company. December 22nd, 2003. Different scale. Don't try to pay attention to the scale, right? Everyone's asleep. Everything's asleep. Everything's asleep. The width of this bar is 1 hour. Nothing happening, nothing happening, nothing happening. Oh my God, something happening. Nothing happening, nothing happening, nothing happening. What happened? There was an earthquake in Central California that was felt as far east as the Mississippi and as far north as Canada, as far south as Mexico. So fundamentally, a lot of people felt an earthquake. What happens when you feel an earthquake? You want to go find out what it is. So what do? Everyone goes to Google, does a query to try and find that site that gives you earthquake data, which is the USGS, by the way. They clicked on the top link, which is the USGS, and promptly denial of service attacked the USGS out of existence. But, then they settle down, and you see over time they figure out, oh, it's just an earthquake, no big deal. Why is this interesting? This is interesting because fundamentally, the news sites are in this spike too, right? The news sites don't have data yet. They're still trying to figure out. They're scrambling reporters. They're trying to understand what's going on. Whereas a lot of the people who those news sites want to reach, the people who care about what just happened, already know. So the democratization of information is in some sense working against traditional news creation. Because a lot of the people that you wanted to talk to in the news know the answer already. So the people you're talking to are the people who weren't that interested in the first place. If you're a news content creator, that kind of graph makes you think hard about what is my value in this ecosystem. It might drive you to a new kind of product mix, a more editorial product mix, or a more integrative product mix. Fact reporting is hard here. Google has a thing called the Google Zeitgeist. The Google Zeitgeist measures search terms that are rapidly moving up or down. Very, much more popular than you'd expect or much less popular than you'd expect. Just sort of interesting trends. For some reason, all of you people are fascinated with Britney Spears. Why? I mean, seriously. Anyway, I guess that's not my place to ask. It turns out, in addition to having relatively little talent compared to the number of albums she sold, Britney Spears has a complex spelling of her name. If you do a search for Brittany Spears, right? That's not her. However, there's undoubtedly somebody on the web who misspelled Britney Spears' name that way. So you'll probably get a result or two. And so we would notice in the query logs that someone did a search for that and then got a couple of results and then clicked back and did another search pretty quickly. It's clearly not the right result. They might then try, Britny, and they get a couple of results. But, they'll wander around trying different spellings until they stumble across Britney, the actual spelling of her name. And now all of a sudden there's lots of results. Okay? So our algorithms noticed that people who were looking for Brittany usually ended up doing a successful search for Britney. What does that give us? That gives us spelling correction. We now know, we being a bunch of computers, know, meaning have learned through an automated and objective fashion, how to do spelling correction. We can tell you probably misspelled that word. Which basically, if you think about it, is automated search refinement. It's a little tiny innovation that was given to us because we found a problem by listening to our users. Again, no user would have said, what I need is spelling correction. But clearly they do. You can ask your users what they want and get a dumb answer. You can try and find problems their users have and make interesting answers. You can look at their data, and you can actually study your users. We do something interesting with our users. We run eye tracking studies, which is to say, we hook people up to a computer, not literally, they sit in front of a computer, and we use this special apparatus which follows their eyes moving around. Just like your eyes are probably moving around following my hand, and there's things called saccades, which have to do with your eyes just moving. But fundamentally, if I watch what your eyes do, I can get a sense for what you're thinking about. So let me show you a little bit of an eye tracking video. Now, the red dot that you see is where the person's eyes are focused right now. This person is doing a search. They did a search for flowers. They got a bunch of results. They got some ads. They're kind of focused on the ads up top, and they clicked on an ad. Now they're waiting. And they got to a flower site. And you can see they're kind of looking all over Heckingon. They can't figure out what to do. Clearly this site is confusing them, right? Because they're looking everywhere trying to figure out what to do. Okay, that was sort of one example. I'll give you another example. I forgot what this example is. Oh, I remember this. So this person is going to be a spelling challenge. They're actually looking for chocolate chip cookies. You're going to have to trust me on this because they're going to spend a long time trying to figure out how to spell chocolate. Still thinking hard about it. Still thinking hard about it. And you can see clearly he's like looking around. This person's trying to figure it out. Like they're struggling a lot. Okay, they've gotten part of the way to chocolate now. They've gotten almost all the way. And you can't see, but they now have chip in there. But what you can see is that there's a lot of visual activity while they're doing a search. What is this guy doing? But he finally does get chocolate chip recipe entered. And now he's trying to figure out what to do. So you see him scanning each result, right? Okay, there's that one, there's that one, there's that one. Looking up and down. Not looking... This person is very, very thorough. So what we can learn from this person is result ordering matters, etc. And finally they select a link and go on. I'm not going to take you through this forever. This particular site brought up a pop-up ad, which if you notice, the person completely ignored. I'm not going to take you through more of that, but this is just another way to listen to your users. So I've talked a lot about the structure of innovation, and I've talked a lot about how you can get ideas for innovation. But one of the most interesting questions is, how do you build an environment that supports innovation? That's what I think we got right. We built a culture and a community of practice from the beginning, which focuses on ensuring that we keep this innovation engine going. Remember I talked about transformational innovations aren't enough. Our auction wasn't enough. You have to do a whole bunch of incremental innovations on top of that. And for any business to create value long term, they have to create additional transformational innovations. So we have a whole bunch of elements of our culture which are deeply embedded in ensuring we can create a climate of information. Most importantly, we live out loud. We talk about everything. We'll talk about performance, we'll talk about technology, we have arguments all the time. Not really mean arguments, but arguments. Because we believe that the best way to find a new idea is to get different people thinking about the same problem. We got our users to tell us what their problems were by looking at the data or studying them, etc. And then we got a bunch of very smart people to have different opinions and talk about them. And so we try to hire people who had different backgrounds and different ways of thinking and put them in rooms together, and we pack them in pretty tight in most offices so that you get great innovative energy and lots of different perspectives. It's the reason we serve food. We don't serve food because we like having fat employees, although that's a perfectly fine side effect. We also provide gym memberships. Anyway, we provide food because what do you do around the lunch table? What do you do around a dinner table? You talk, you engage, you interact. And we usually serve these big, long cafeteria-style tables so that you don't actually know necessarily who you're sitting next to. We don't serve them at small tables, so it's really easy to have a discussion with just your click. Right? It's a long table. So the person sitting next to you is going to weigh in on your input. Okay? He's going to provide her thoughts on whatever it is you happen to be talking about. Lots of input on the same problem. Lots of diverse perspectives. Living out loud drives innovation. And I could have talked about any number of different kinds of things, but one other one that really matters is if you're going to be an innovative company, you have to reward risk and not punish failure. Most innovations fail. Most evolutionary changes are irrelevant. You never notice. Or don't make any difference. My hair color is brown, not black. Makes no material difference to my life. Similarly, most innovations in business don't matter. Most are not actively destructive, they're just irrelevant. Those are failures. For cultures that punish you for failing, what will rapidly happen to the people who have ideas? They will rapidly stop sharing them because they are incented not to. The hardest part of cultural change is actually to accept failure as part of the learning process and actually build support structures and processes around learning from failures. We've done that a lot. We experiment a lot, and our value is in failing fast. Let me give you an example. We have a product called Google Checkout. Google Checkout is a way that people can enter their credit card and their buying information in Google and use it on sites all over the web. It's been a really important product for us. It turns out roughly 2 out of every 3 shopping carts with something in them on the web are abandoned. Let me say that in action-oriented sentences. You go to a website that sells something. You found the site somehow. Maybe you did a search for it. You did a search for, double mint gum. You found a site that sells gum. You went to that site. You added the pack of gum to your shopping cart. You clicked checkout. So I want to, I want to complete this transaction. I want to give you money at gum.com. And 2 out of every 3 of those carts are then abandoned. So if you think about that from the merchant's perspective, that's the worst of all possible worlds. I've gone to all the trouble of finding you and getting you and interacting with you, and you've used up my computer resources, et cetera, and you didn't give me any money. And clearly the user experience isn't very good because you dropped out for some reason. Something bad happened. We built Checkout because based on a set of user studies, user surveys, and user data, we found that there were two barriers to those shopping cart creation. One was that users didn't want to give their private information to sort of arbitrary websites. And two, it takes on average 17 fields to fill in an order at an arbitrary website. So we built Google Checkout, so you give your information to us once, and it takes you one click to check out. So we found that on average, a Google Checkout-enabled merchant has 1/2 as many cart abandons as a non-checkout-enabled merchant. So clearly we got something right. But as we were talking about this project, we had a lot of problems about UI, user interface. Exactly how do we show checkout in our search results in our ads? And we had a lot of ideas. But we had lots of ideas. I knew the answer. I absolutely was positive it had to do with a color and a certain badge, etc. I knew the answer. I just wanted to go ahead and do it. So we did a study. We compared 4 or 5 different models. My model was the worst. Okay, I was wrong. I hate being wrong. But I was wrong. We didn't use my model. We used the model that worked, and that's okay. It's okay to run experiments as long as you follow it with data and do what the data says. I'll give you another example. Our users used to tell us they wanted 20 search results on the main page instead of 10. By default, if you do a search, you get 10 results back, right? 10 results takes about 400 milliseconds to respond. So we heard all these people say, yes, more results, more results. It's okay, fine. So we gave them 20 results. It's the same. The top 10 results are the same, right? Nothing material changes here. We just added 10 more in the bottom. Nothing interesting happened, right? Instead of taking 400 milliseconds to respond, it took us 600 milliseconds to respond. And we lost 15% of our traffic. 15% of the searches dropped because they were bored waiting for the results. 200 milliseconds, they were bored. It's okay. We learned something. Speed matters. You also have to have a culture that lets people be passionate about what they're doing. So one of the things that we do is what's called 20% time. Our engineers are expected to spend 20% of their time working on something which isn't their main project, just something they're interested in. Most engineers, you could envisage this as being, oh, every Friday I'm going to work on that. Engineers don't actually do that. They basically work for a couple of months on a project and then work for a couple of weeks on a 20% time project, or they bank it up for a year and then do a month, or something like that, right? Most of the time when I talk to other CIOs about this, what I get as a result of, oh my God, that's incredibly stupid, right? It's such a huge tax on productivity. How could you possibly do that? The answer is twofold. One, we get such a motivation boost out of it that the 80% of time they're spending is way more productive than just 80% of a normal engineer. And second, some of our very greatest products have come out of 20% time. Google News was a 20% time product. Almost everything on Google Labs, Gmail, was a 20% product. The economic value created by the few of those 20% projects more than pays for whatever the tax involved is. And another really important process-oriented component around innovation. Lots of companies want to structure their innovation. They have an innovation czar, and they have an innovation process person. And when you have an idea, you get to submit a business case, and it includes a budget, and then a committee of people will meet in a dark room smoking cigars and decide whether your innovation is worthy. Problem is, by that point, the startup energy is so high that you've taught most innovators to do something else, particularly for incremental innovations that are little tiny changes, but little tiny changes matter, remember? And in the event you actually manage to survive with a transformational innovation, you're going to kill the incremental innovations on top of it by requiring all this sort of startup energy. We have a different approach. We let there be chaos. 20% time projects, lots of small projects, lots of projects starting and stopping all the time. It creates total chaos. And then periodically, we try to organize the chaos into sort of themes, focus areas, strange attractors, if you'll stick with the mathematics analogy, and try very hard not to kill the fragile little things. We measure success over time, but we cull projects late. Rather than culling projects at startup, we have projects, regardless, measure their percent growth. Week over week, month over month, quarter over quarter, how many more users do you have as a percentage you had last time? If you're losing users, your project's not very good. If you're flat, you have an issue. If you're going up, you're interesting. And as you go up enough, we start investing in you, and you go from a little tiny project into a much bigger project. We try to cull projects as late as we possibly can to give innovation, which is a very, very fragile flower, as long a spring as possible to thrive. And finally, you can get innovation by getting your users to do it for you. One of our core principles is that we have several thousand wicked smart developers. There are several million in the world. Let our users do innovations for themselves on our platform. There are some constraints you have to do. One of them is you have to unlock the user data. You have to let users own their own data. A classic business model is that by having user data, I own you. You can never get out. It's pure lock-in. We believe something different. We believe that by providing you value that you can always leave, developers will trust us and users will trust us because they'll know if our product starts to stink, they can just walk away. Okay. So by that, they're willing to take risks on us. We can get other developers to develop on our platform, and we found some really, really terrific examples, like the Maps API. Google Maps, a great product. You know what makes it even better? That we have a public API that people can use. So if, for example, you were interested in trying to find an apartment in San Diego, that application exists. We didn't build the particular application which is on this slide. We built the Maps data. Everything else came, I think, in this case, from Craigslist, which is a lightweight web. There's a little application written by somebody who doesn't work for us that overlays Craigslist information on Google Maps so that you can find things in context. That's a cool innovation. I didn't pay for it. But Maps traffic and Maps data got the benefit of that innovation. Similarly, personalization. Right? I think I commented on personalization being one of the really hard unsolved problems. We have a product called iGoogle, which allows you to set up your Google homepage the only way you want, any way you want. You can build gadgets on top of it. We built a bunch of gadgets. There are something like 50,000 gadgets in the iGoogle gadget directory. We didn't build very many of them at all. For example, this translate gadget in the lower left-hand corner, where is Petco Park? Petco Park is in San Diego, by the way. You could auto-translate from English to French, written by somebody named Raphael who lives in Sydney. I don't know why the Australians are doing English to French translation, but this person did. And it did a reasonable translation. How cool is it to get innovation that someone else does the work for and your platform benefits from? And finally, and perhaps most importantly, you have to be your own user. Remember I talked about Gmail as an example of a product that got created because a user, in this case a Google programmer, hated email. At Google, we use our own products. We use our own products because that means we're more likely to see our users' problems more quickly and get more useful help. We recently migrated from a third-party calendar server to Google Calendar. It's a corporate version of the commercial program that lots of people in the world use today. We did it over a weekend, and we moved about 600,000 events across that weekend. Users on the internet file bugs with us. They say things like, oh, Google Calendar didn't work to create this event last week. That's not a very helpful bug, because I have no idea what happened. In the 12 hours after I migrated all of Google to Google Calendar, we had over 1,000 bugs filed by Google engineers. And the bugs were things like, the font is offset by 1 pixel on this screen after this 17 keystroke event. Engineers file good bugs. By being our own user, we found bugs more quickly. We were able to find those errors, and we created a whole internal market around incremental innovation. So, for example, now there's a tool which goes around and scrapes the menus of all the cafes, and you can specify, I like this kind of meat, and it will put it on your calendar which of the cafes is serving that kind of meat. It's stupid, right? It has very little value unless you happen to be a foodie. But it's a little lightweight, trivial innovation because we were our own users. Now, where are we in the talk? We've talked about what innovation is. We've talked about how you can figure out what innovation to do. We've given a bunch of examples of the benefits. At this point, people are asking the questions of, okay, well, what can I do? I like Google's culture. It makes sense. But what can I do to create a culture of innovation at my company? Google had a big advantage. We were a greenfields operation. We created our culture. For places that didn't create our culture, there are basically only 2 levers you have to push. If you look at the literature on business success and on military success as well, you'll find that almost everybody talks about leadership as the answer. Leadership is the answer to everything. When I was a researcher at RAND, I did a bunch of studies into, among other things, very highly effective military units. And one of the things I found is that leadership does not appear to matter at all. Leadership appears to be completely a red herring on almost every front, except on one. Without strong leadership, you will not build diverse teams. You will not hire diverse employees. If you do not hire diverse employees, you will not get multiple perspectives. If you do not get multiple perspectives, your innovation will die because you'll all see the problem the same way. Leadership is critical to building diversity and, by extension, innovation. And second of all, your HR processes. Probably you're compensating people and promoting them based on execution and execution alone. The problem with that is that means risk takers get kind of the short end of the stick, right? Because risk takers won't always execute. So they won't get extra money, they won't get promoted, they'll just sort of lag. And soon they will learn that to get promoted and get more money and get more important and get a corner office and a designated parking space, you must never try anything new. If you're a culture trying to become an innovative culture, these are your two levers. Cheap speaker's trick. Cheap speaker's trick being the so what slide. The so what slide always tells the audience the guy's about to get off stage. So everybody wake up, because there might be questions in a minute. This is my so what stage. A slide. Therefore, I must be about to get off stage. There are fundamentally three things in my talk that are worth remembering. Number one, innovation's happening at your organization today. It's just probably you're killing it. The odds are good. Left to its own device, innovation is fragile. It will not survive. Your job as a leader is to find the innovations, foster them, wait as long as you can to kill them. Because it's likely you'll kill the good ones. We tried to kill Gmail. We tried to kill AdSense. It's likely you'll kill the good ones, because the really good ones are antithetical to what you know how to do. And finally, you have to accept risk. You have to take a tax for failure and treat it as an opportunity for learning. This is where your leaders come in. This is where your HR processes come in.